How are you doing today? What festival? Let's hear it for Jess, Herbie, we're going to put this on. It's a great event. Am I clear? Can everybody hear pretty good? Well, I'd like to start off by saying that I'm honored to be the first speaker here at this festival, and I think this is the beginning of a very auspicious start to a series of festivals like this. My personal interest and journey in this began way back in the 70s when I was a kid. My dad, John over here, had a bunch of books. He's looking like, how am I in this? He had a bunch of books like those little paperback Ripley's Believe It or Not series, around the house. And I think that fostered my love of the unusual, the offbeat, the kind of, the kind of stuff you see in the library, and the UFOs and Bigfoot, and that kind of Fortean phenomenon. Around 1992, I got very interested in the Westford Night, a kind of anomalous inscription up in the town of Westford, Mass. And what happened with that was I found out that there was a carving of my family coat of arms on a rock, etched in a rock up in Westford, Mass, that they think is pre-Columbian. It's about 100 years before Columbus's voyage in 1492. This carving was thought to be around 1398. It's a late medieval Scottish voyage that a certain Prince Henry Sinclair came over, evidently, maybe, and his right-hand man was Sir James Gunn. And they think that this Gunn knight died in what's now Westford, Mass. And to memorialize that he was here, they carved a memorial effigy in a stone on a ledge next to Depot Street. Well, when I got interested in anomalous archaeology like the Newport Tower, the Westford Night, America's Stonehenge, Dighton Rock, these kinds of things, in looking into that, I came, in books about oddities, you research all this other stuff, and you come across cryptids, you come across UFO reports, and some of these things overlap. These interesting areas have some overlap. So what happened with that was I began chronicling things that I saw from Massachusetts. And I made a website called Amazing Massachusetts. And what I decided to, the reason I decided to keep it to Massachusetts is there's so many of these stone structures and anomalies around New England. I figured every other weekend I'll end up in Vermont or far away, so I figured I'd keep it just to the Bay State. And also I was interested in what's in the western part of the state. Coming from Marshfield, I'm familiar with towns like Plymouth and Braintree and these kind of, this side of the equation. But what about New Braintree and Heath and Beckett and all these towns that you never think of or go to unless you live out that way? I mean, they probably feel the same way about this side of the state, right? So I got interested in cases I would see in books. I'd say, oh, this anomalous thing happened on October Mountain over in the Berkshires, and I'd write it down. I started chronicling and making a compendium of interesting things from the Bay State, and that began my research into what I call Amazing Massachusetts. So in terms of cryptozoology, cryptids in Massachusetts, when I looked into the origins of cryptozoology, it seems that there was a certain Belgian-French scientist named Bernard Hubelmans. And Bernard is usually credited with Ivan T. Sanderson with the origins of modern-day cryptozoology. Little glitch here.
Can you hold this?
Excuse me for a moment. Space. Thank you. One second. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so Hubelmans was, as I said, a Belgian-French scientist and researcher and author. He lived from 1916 to 2001, and he's best known as one of the pioneering figures in cryptozoology. Cryptozoology, as most of you probably know, some of this I'll probably be backtracking, and probably a lot of you know a lot of this stuff already, but I figured I'd start with the ground floor and kind of work my way into it. Is the science of hidden animals. Crypto meaning hidden, and zoology meaning science of animals. Ivan T. Sanderson was a British biologist, born in Scotland, and he was a writer who became a naturalized citizen of the United States. He lived from 1911 to 1973. So they had somewhat roughly corresponding lifespans. Sanderson wrote on nature and travel. He was a frequent guest person on variety shows, often displaying exotic animals like lemurs and things that were quite exotic in the 50s and 60s, a little more common now. But he was, as I said, another founding figure of cryptozoology, the study of unknown animals. And he also authored various subjects on paranormal topics, and he wrote fiction under a pseudonym, Terrence Roberts. So, this is like my one Bigfoot sighting. I'm kidding. This is out in Bolton, Mass. I was honored to be in the movie, the Bridgewater Triangle 2013 movie that Aaron Cadu and Manny Fenelon made. And my friend, who's not here today, Kristen Evans, a fellow researcher, she was the one who got me in the movie because she said to the guys when they were doing Titan Rock and Profile Rock, she said, "I have the guy for you. There's this guy in Marshall, Derek Gunn, he's the rock guy." So I was interviewed about other things in that movie, but unfortunately, 45 minutes of talk ends up like 90 seconds in a movie. So I'm kind of the rock guy. If you've ever seen that full version, the 90-minute version, I am in there about Titan Rock and Profile Rock and a few other inscriptions and things. How many here have seen that movie? Most of you have seen the first Bridgewater Triangle movie from 2013? It was premiered at UMass Dartmouth. It's an interesting movie. It's actually, I think, you can see it now for free on YouTube. It's available. I should say this, there was a second version of that movie where they edited it down, and it was called something like America's Bermuda Triangle. And I think they went from 90 minutes down to like 43 minutes to fit it in 60 minutes. And my brother Doug was telling everybody, "Hey, my brother Derek's going to be on, Destination America." And the rock part was edited, so I'm not in that movie. I'm in the long version, I'm in the short version. So this is Ubelman's, or not Ubelman's. And this is one of his most famous books. This is a very one of the first real books about cryptozoology. On the Track of Unknown Animals. I believe it came out in French first, and this is the English edition. And this is Ivan T. Sanderson, and he's holding a track from Clearwater, Florida, of what was believed to be a giant penguin. And it has since turned out that this was a hoax, that there was a gentleman who had tennis shoes or something with iron, three-toed, things attached. But there was a period of time in I think the 40s where people thought that there was a giant penguin around Clearwater, Florida. The interesting thing is Ivan T. Sanderson did a book, and in that book, interesting in terms of this talk, where he mentions that giant penguin tracks have been quote unquote found as far north as Nantucket. And of course I got really interested when I saw that mention of Massachusetts. But unfortunately, I can't seem to find any other reference to that. He's been dead since 73, so you can't ask him. There he is with one of the tracks from Clearwater, Florida. Like I said, probably a hoax. Another well-known, I'm sure many people here know this gentleman. This is Loren Coleman. And Loren Coleman was born in 1947. He's probably the most well-known living cryptozoologist. He lives in Maine now. For a while he lived in, I believe, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he's the guy who popularized the term the Bridgewater Triangle. He also coined the term the Dover Demon, and Loren runs a very interesting museum in Maine called the International Cryptozoology Museum, and if you had a chance to get up that way, I would suggest that you go see it. He's authored, I think, something like, I don't know if it's 20 or 40, an incredible amount of books. These are a few of his books. He has Monsters of Massachusetts, Mothman, and Other Curious Encounters, and Cryptozoology A to Z. So Loren was in the Bridgewater Triangle movie, and as I said, he's the guy who popularized the notion, the term, the Bridgewater Triangle. And if you look into it, it seems like, I'm not sure about this, but it seems like that the people of Bridgewater area actually came up with that term informally through the years, and then Loren put it into print. Some sources you'll see it says he coined it, and then other sources it says he popularized it. So those are two different things. But anyways, this is Lauren up at his museum with his statue of Bigfoot. And I got to meet Lauren around 2007 at a event up in Watertown that John Horrigan put on. So let's go from, okay, well actually let me backtrack one second. So Lauren says that in one of his articles he mentions that there was some debate about who actually came up with the term cryptozoology, because some people cite Uelmans and some people cite Ivan Sanderson. And it turns out that that it seems to be one of those ideas of independent invention, that Sanderson came up with it, and then Uelman did as well, independently. They came up with that term. So there was some talk about who actually came up with it first, but it seems like it might have been Sanderson. And then in this article of the International Society for Cryptozoology, this is in the summer of 1983, and you'll hear 1983 pop up a couple times in this talk, but in the summer of 83, this was the first appearance of the word cryptid. And cryptid, we know actually who came up with that term. It was a guy named John Wall of Manitoba, and he introduced the term that he invented. It was based off the word cryptozoological, and he just made the term cryptid. And by the end of the 90s, it was actually showing up in dictionaries. Cryptid denotes an animal of interest to cryptozoology, of course. Cryptids are in the most limited definition, either unknown species of animals or those who are thought to have been extinct, but which may have survived into modern times to await rediscovery. Kind of like the coelacanth. Thought it was extinct, that fish off Madagascar there, that actually still exists. So this is where it first appeared, summer of 1983, the word cryptid appeared. Okay, the Bridgewater Triangle. Sorry for the fuzzy photo. I had to blow it up. The Bridgewater Triangle. Everybody here familiar with the Bridgewater Triangle? Who isn't? I'll just go over it real briefly. But the corners of the Bridgewater Triangle are defined by the towns of Abington, Freetown, and Rehoboth, 3 towns to the west. And within the triangle are a bunch of towns. It depends on how you draw it. It depends on if you go from the center of the town or to the very edge of each town, or to the west and north and east. But it's sometimes shown as comprising parts of Taunton, Brockton, Raynham, Bridgewater, Mansfield, Norton, Easton, North Middleborough, Dighton, and Berkeley. And of course, within the triangle exists the very famous, almost 17,000-acre Hockomock Swamp, where much of the activity is focused. The triangle itself is approximately 200 square miles. So I wanted to mention briefly, this is a whole, we can go delve into a whole other thing here, but the word Hockomock, if you tend to look at most online websites, about most books, or talk to most people, they usually say it's the place where spirits dwell. Sometimes you hear people say, place where evil spirits dwell. I am not an expert in Native American languages, but I'm pretty sure that a word for a place where spirit dwells would be Manitowoc. Like we have all these et words around here, you know, like Cohasset, Massachusetts. So spirit place, to me, would be Manitowoc, and bad spirit place would be Magi, Manitowoc. I think that Hockomock is actually, they're conflating things a little bit. It's actually the name of a trickster god. It's actually related to Habamako, and it's probably a variant off of Habamako. And of course, in Pembroke, Mass, we have Habamock Pond, which has some legends associated with it too. Habamock Pond in Pembroke is this beautiful little pond here. There was a legend I read somewhere that the Native Americans, that there were a couple young teens, Native American teens, that there was a stump sticking out of the pond, and it always was the same height, whether it was summer drought or springtime, you know, snowfall and snow melt, and that they would whack this stump with their paddle from their canoe or something, and that they were being a little bit disrespectful and whacking this stump in the pond there. The canoe kind of flipped and messed them up. I don't know if they drowned or something like that, but usually these sort of haunted places have these kind of stories. So let's go into some specifics. Let's talk about Bigfoot. So we have all kinds of Bigfoot sightings in Massachusetts. We don't have, say, maybe the level of like a California does, but or the Pacific Northwest. But we do have steady and persistent reports of Bigfoot in the Bay State. And there are Class A reports, which involve clear sightings, where misinterpretation or misidentification with other animals is ruled out. There are Class B sightings, which are not as definitive. Class B are usually incidents where there's a possible Sasquatch was observed at a great distance, maybe poor lighting conditions. Sometimes there could be credible reports, but nothing was seen, but distinct characteristic sounds were heard. And then there's Class C sightings, which these are ones that are, have a high potential for inaccurate reports. They are kept by people in the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, but they're very rarely listed publicly. They're kind of like secondhand accounts, or my uncle's brother's wife's ex-husband saw something back in the day. So how about we go through a couple choice Bigfoot reports. There was a fantastic sighting in summer of 1989. There was a gentleman who was hiking the mountain, October Mountain in Lennoxdale, and he observed a glimpse of a moving object ahead, about 100 yards ahead of him. It was a very heavily wooded area, and so he had a hard time seeing it first. And at first all he could see was arms moving and an occasional glimpse of a fur-covered body. And at first he thought he was looking at a black bear, but then he pulled up a pair of 40-power binoculars and he attempted to focus on what the object was. And again, it was very difficult because of all the brush, but at one point the animal moved into somewhat of a slight clearing. And it was then that he realized he was observing something highly unusual. The animal was tall and slightly stooped. Its body was massive and covered completely with reddish hair. He noticed that the head was unusual in its shape and its size. The head was rather pointed and covered with hair. The face was dark and had less hair than the top of the head. The neck seemed to be almost non-existent. This is a characteristic that we would come across. At that moment, it turned towards him, and through his binoculars, he was absolutely shocked. It looked very human. At that point, he was so frightened that he took measures to hide himself. And after getting over the initial chill, he continued to study this animal, or whatever it was. It was still in a small clearing, and it seemed very preoccupied. It was moving stones and small pieces of wood and grubbing for either roots or insects. It was too far away from the gentleman to see exactly what it was doing, but he could see a large arm moving to its mouth every so often. But really what it took him by the observer by surprise was that it seemed to be stacking rocks that were in the way. And at that point, he thought maybe it was a human, because he couldn't figure out what he was looking at, because it wasn't exhibiting normal animal behavior, but it did not look like a human. So he was very confused. And at this point, he went a little closer to see if it was a man in a fur coat or a monkey suit. And he checked the wind, and he tried to make an effort to stay downwind from it. And eventually he was able to get 20 yards or so closer to the animal. And he found a good observation area and studied the animal closely. At that point, he could plainly see that this was something very strange indeed. It was not human. The arms were too long, and the face seemed very distorted and elongated. The arms extended past the kneecaps. The hands were very large but human in shape. He became so frightened at that point he began to run back to the trail. He looked back and noticed that the animal had headed back and was slowly moving back into the forest. He didn't think that the animal was aware of him, even though he thought maybe it should be, because he thought maybe he could be heard. This sighting occurred near the top of the mountain, approximately 1,200 feet above sea level. Then another case that's a famous case is Joseph DeAndre, who's here today. He might be outside.
He's out back.
He's out back.
Right now,
Yeah. Joseph DeAndre has his tables, they're fantastic t-shirts available here. And Joseph had a sighting in Bridgewater in 1978 near the Claybanks Pond, in which he was talking to a friend and had a sort of idea that an idea came to his mind that he should turn around and look. And when he turned around and looked, after sort of having this interior thought, he said he observed a shaggy Bigfoot creature across the way, moving through the woods. He didn't see it very long. But what happened for Joseph was that quick sighting, just a few, probably seconds even, has led him, I mean, he's here today, right? He's been into this for like 30 years or more, right? So Joseph, if you talk to him, I'm sure he will tell you about his sighting. It's one of the well-known ones. It's mentioned quite a bit and discussed in the Bridgewater Triangle movie, and it's in a lot of the literature, the early literature. You see articles in certain newspapers and magazines. Joseph DeAndre's sighting is kind of a classic in the literature for local stuff. This next one I found very interesting because there are photographs of the footprints. So in the Dartmouth area, this is from the files of the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, which I'm sure a lot of you probably know about. This incident occurred in the Dartmouth area. It was a residential cul-de-sac neighborhood. It had snowed on a Friday night, and then on Saturday evening, this gentleman went on his back deck at about 11:30 at night. And he stated that the family cats, the 3 cats, were acting kind of odd. They were kind of hanging by the back door. They wanted to come in. They weren't, they seemed like they were a little different that night, exhibiting behavior that they wanted to go in. So no unusual sounds or smell were noted at the time. But the next morning, on Sunday morning, the homeowner's young daughter discovered snow tracks in the backyard. And he went into his backyard and he observed 2 sets of unusual looking tracks that traversed the yard. There were numerous fresh deer tracks as well. And the homeowner stated that one set of prints was distinctly smaller compared to the other set. But both sets of these tracks originated in the neighbor's yard, and they basically went from a 4.5-foot tall garbage can to the next yard over. You know, the thing had been near the garbage can, whatever it was. So I have some pictures, 3 pictures to show you that they gave to the BFRO to show. One of the homeowner's photos shows a clear right footprint with 4 distinct large toes. The print has a very deep impression and is significantly larger in length and width than the homeowner's size 10 shoe. Here's a couple more pictures of Joseph. We'll go back to those lights. So here's some pictures from Dartmouth. These are in the files of the BFRO. This is from the Dartmouth area. And as you can see in the middle, there are some large footprints. The kids in the neighborhood, of course, all came in. Everybody wanted to see it in the neighborhood. So there's a close-up of one of the prints. To give you a sense of scale is this picture here. So that's a size 10 shoe. Now I'm going to go backwards 1 second here. So this is Joseph DeAndre's made the BTET, the Bridgewater Triangle Expedition Team. And he actually was out looking after his sighting. He went for many years, he made a team of people. They would go out, they would stay overnight in the Hockamont Swamp and various areas looking for more sightings. Now this next thing, remember I mentioned October Mountain in the Berkshires. It's the largest state forest in our state. The sighting where the guy saw the Bigfoot piling the rocks. Well, in 1983, in August of 1983, there were 4 young people, two guys and 2 gals, that were camping and having some steak and chicken and stuff, and they're kind of picnicking and staying out over in October Mountain. Well, evidently they heard some sounds, and they were sort of plagued by these sounds around the darkness around the campfire, you know, on the edge of where they could see. They went out, the 2 guys said, you know, enough of this. They went out to see what it was, and they saw a creature, I guess in the moonlight, but they saw a creature in the distance, and they could see the eye shine from the creature. They estimated that was like a giant thing. It was not a man. And they basically took off and left the camp. You know, they decided not to stay. But as I understand it, as they left the area, when they were moving their truck or car, by the headlights, they saw the creature again. So the thing had kind of come over to where they were parked and were leaving. And this was in the Eagle, I think it was, the Berkshire Eagle. Weird mountain creature reported by picnickers. So this is a case from the early 80s, 1983. Local case from the Virtues. Okay, we'll move over to pukwudgies. People familiar with pukwudgies? Yeah. Kind of a growing thing. It seems like a growing thing. So this is an illustration by my daughter Alexandra over there, and she was doing some stickers for this event, and I asked her, "Can you do a pukwudgie?" So this is her interpretation of pukwudgie. So according to legend, pukwudgies are typically 2 to 3 feet tall. They're sort of generally humanoid. Sometimes they have described as having big ears, noses, and hands. Sometimes they're said to be sort of bristly and sort of porcupine-ish in the back and troll-like in the front. Other times they allegedly have grayish colored skin. Some people even say that sometimes they glow. Like other trickster figures around the world, they can sometimes appear and disappear at will. They allegedly can shapeshift. And as I said, the most common version of that is a creature that looks somewhat like a porcupine from the back and a sort of half troll, half human creature from the front who walks upright. They're said to sometimes lure people to their deaths. They can use magic. They can use poison arrows and little spears. And they supposedly even throw sand in the face of observers to temporarily blind them. They can create fire. They supposedly can control what they call te pai wonkas, which are essentially will-o'-the-wisps. They are, gaseous balls of light that you see in swampy areas. Some people say that those are the souls of indigenous people that the pukwudgies have killed. Now, there are pukwudgie sightings even recently. They go back, if you read about old tales from Cape Cod, if you read The Narrow Land by Elizabeth Renyard, you'll see accounts, I think that's like from the 20s, where she talks about pukwudgies and legends of pukwudgies on Cape Cod. They're also seen supposedly in the Freetown State Forest, and small little humanoid creatures like that are kind of a worldwide phenomenon. We all know about trolls and small things that are like that. And they all kind of act the same no matter where they are in the world. They're kind of mischievous and can be kind of like trickster figures. They can be kind of helpful or not so helpful. Some people, in 2023, someone wrote to an online blog about a person who lives in Norwell, which is South Shore, next to my town of Marshall. And she was taking care of her friend's Labrador when the friend was away. And the dog and Mary went off for an early morning walk around 4 or 5 in the morning. And they were next to a watershed. And if you look into the reports, whether it's UFOs or pukwudgies or other strange cryptids, it seems to be like a lot of these things have a water connection. And so again, in this case, there is a water connection. She was next to a patch of woods and swamp. So Mary and the dog went on one of these early morning walks without anything strange happening. But on March 1st of that year, it was pitch black, and as they walked on a road, the dog stopped in its tracks and let out a low growl. It had seen a raccoon or maybe a coyote. Feeling nervous about being alone in the dark with a wild animal, Mary looked around to see what had startled the dog. Well, I'm sorry, I should say Mary's not her real name, it's just a pseudonym. It was not a raccoon, it was something much stranger. Crouched near the woods was a small humanoid creature. It was covered in what looked like matted black fur. And Mary thought that the creature stared at her with glowing green eyes, but she wasn't sure if she just imagined this particular detail. Whatever the creature was, it was something she had never seen before in her life, and she and the dog ran home. A few days later, the dog went home to its owner, and Mary thought that was the end of her strange experience. But on the night of March 13th, so just a couple weeks later, Mary heard some unusual sounds coming from outside her house. It sounded as though something was quietly but insistently tapping on the side of her house, or possibly the window. At first, Mary thought that maybe her daughter had locked herself out of the house, but that was not the case. She was inside. Nervously, Mary's thoughts then turned to that small humanoid that she had seen by the woods. Was it outside her house, tapping on the walls and windows? The next day, she talked with some people at work about what had been happening, and one of them suggested that maybe she had encountered a pukwudgie. A pukwudgie, as I said, is one name for small, hairy, magical humanoids that are said to live in the woods of New England. It seems that Pukwudgie is somewhat of a borrowed term, that the Native Americans, the Wampanoag in this area, had a different term that maybe has been lost to the ages because their culture was just about decimated. And that Pukwudgie is originally a word used more by Midwest Indians, maybe, or Indians, Native Americans not in this particular area. That it's sort of borrowed and used because it's a similar creature. Pukwudgies are believed to be mischievous at best and malevolent at worst. And traditionally, the local Native Americans believed that the little people would help humans if treated with respect. But that's not the case with some Pukwudgies who like to shoot people with poison darts, lure them to cliffs, and generally lurk around and frighten anyone who encounters them. But this might be, this is speculation, but maybe this is because that unlike people who live in Iceland with little elves and things, we don't know how to treat these little creatures with respect. Maybe they feel. There's a very well-known case from 1990. It's mentioned in the Bridgewater Triangle movie. This is Bill Russo, and in 1990, Bill Russo was walking with his dog Sammy near some high-tension lines. When he came to, at night, he came to an area where a street lamp was sort of illuminating a spot on the ground. And at first his dog was acting kind of strange, and his dog was pretty fearless usually. And at one point, he thought he heard a funny sound, and he realized what the dog was responding to. And into this light of the street light came this creature. He described it as being, he thought it was maybe not a young thing, whatever it was, that maybe it was in middle age or advanced age. And he described it, if you watch the movie, if I can do it correctly, he was saying that he thought it was making some sounds that sounded like, Iwachu, Iwachu, Kier, Kier, Iwachu. And he noticed how afraid the dog was, and he never saw his dog Sandy act like that. And so he kind of hightailed it out of there with the dog. And when he went home, he stayed up all night. He said he was like disturbed, trying to figure out what the heck was the thing I just saw. It was like a little creature, it was covered with hair. At first he thought it was a child. He didn't know what he was looking for. And he decided that it was probably speaking English. That when it said, Iwachu was, we want you. And when it said, Kier, Kier was, come here, come here. And he said that the thing did not approach him, that it was beckoning him as if it was trying to get him into its space for some reason. So again, this sound relates a little bit to the possibly malevolent sides of these little elves and trickster creatures and Pukwudgies and things. Because he said it did not advance to a certain point. It kept a distance, but then it was beckoning him, that it wanted him to come there. And he says he wished he could have been brave enough to go over and kind of check it out a little closer, but he wasn't. And I don't blame him, really. Okay, there's a very interesting book. I highly recommend this book for people that are interested in local history and sort of natural stuff in general. There's a book by John Hanson Mitchell called Ceremonial Time. It's about the area of town of Littleton, Mass, up by Lowell. And he writes a book. It's basically a natural history of 10,000 years, 15,000 years of 1 square mile. Within this book, one little section that relates to our subject today, there's a part where he has Native American friends, and they conduct a little ceremony. I don't know if they're smoking tobacco or something, but they get into sort of an area where they start dancing around a campfire. And John Hanson Mitchell is watching this ceremony with his Native American friends. And at one point, in the shadows and the flickering light of the campfire, he sees like a little hairy creature join in with these guys, these Native American people, in the circle. And he's looking at this thing like he couldn't, again, he was very perplexed. It was very unexpected. It just kind of came in and danced around for a bit, and then it left. And he kept asking his Native American informants, what was that thing the other night? What was that? And of course, the Native American people, according to this book, they kept saying, don't get so hung up on it, dude. It was one of our ancestors. Like, don't. Like, I know you want to get to the bottom of this, but it was one of our ancestors. That's the answer. It was one of our ancestors. And the whole book is not about Bigfoot or anything like that, or Pukwudgies, but there's a little section of this book that relates to what I think was a Pukwudgie sighting possibly. It was a small, hairy, humanoid creature. Okay, the famous Dover Demon. The Dover Demon was a sighting in April of 1977 in the Boston suburb of Dover. It's basically a cryptid report that's kind of had world recognition. I mean, there are little statues you can buy. It's pretty well known. Lauren Coleman talks about it a lot in his books. It's in the Bridgewater Triangle movie. Well, I'm not sure it's in there. But basically, it's well known in the literature. And it was witnessed by a few teenagers over a 2-day period. There was William Bartlett was the first person to see it. He and 2 friends were driving along Farm Street just around 10 p.m. And William Bartlett witnessed a creature standing on a rock wall. Its eyes were sort of glowing in the headlights. It was not a dog, it was not a cat. It had no tail, and it had a strange egg-shaped head. Its body was thin, had very spindly arms and legs, and the fingers resembled tendrils, he said, that grasped the broken wall. And it began to traverse on top of the wall, on top of the stones, and he saw it for just a few moments before passing by. But when he turned the car around, it was gone. And then a mere 2 hours later, John Baxter, who was walking along Miller High Road in Dover, he proceeded down the street. He saw a small figure approaching him, and the figure was unidentifiable in the dark. But as it neared Baxter, he knew it was not an ordinary animal or human. Instead, it was something in between. And then the figure scurried off to the left and descended a wooded gully and stopped on the other side. And I think this is pretty amazing. This 15-year-old, he followed the creature, pausing at the top of the gully where he got his first good look at it. He said it sat near a tree with its feet molded around the top of a rock. Its head was sort of figure-8 shaped with 2 dark eyes and a body that somewhat resembled a monkey. He was struck with fear at that point and he left the scene, moving swiftly down the road until he reached Farm Street, where a couple, noticing that he was shaken, picked him up and gave him a ride home. Then the next night, April 22nd, 1977, a 15-year-old girl named Abby Bradley saw the creature standing upright next to a tree. Her time was also around midnight. All 3 of these witnesses gave somewhat similar descriptions of what they saw and drew sketches of the creature. The monster was dubbed the Dover Demon. Again, that's Lauren Coleman who came up with that. And when Bartlett drew his own sketch, he wrote on the bottom, "I, Bill Bartlett, swear on a stack of Bibles I saw this creature." So, a noted Maine cryptozoologist, Lauren Coleman, spoke to the teens within 1 week of the sighting and concluded that they were credible. The Dover Demon was sighted at night for 2 days within a 2-mile radius near water. Some authorities thought it was a foal or maybe a moose calf. Other people, I heard one rumor that it was a monkey that escaped from like a lab that its fur fall off because it was being treated experimentally medically. But to this day, Bartlett still remains shaken and mystified by his witnessing of the Dover Demon. In an interview, he said, "In a lot of ways, it's kind of embarrassing to me, but I definitely saw something. It was definitely weird. I didn't make it up. Sometimes I wish I had." So this is an illustration I did of one of the kids' drawings. Okay, large dogs in the cryptozoological records. So there's a whole phenomenon of sort of demon dogs, large black dogs. If you look into this on Wikipedia, you'll see extensive entries, especially in England. It seems to be an English folkloric thing that is actually a worldwide phenomenon. But it originated in English folklore. We have our own case. The well-known case is from 1976. There was a large black and brown dog seen in Abington, Massachusetts, at the top of at the apex of the Bridgewater Triangle. For a couple days, they say the town was somewhat terrorized because what happened was that there was a firefighter named Philip Kane. His daughter woke up and was concerned about her ponies. When Philip Kane went outside and checked on the ponies, he said that there was a dog almost as large as the ponies, supposedly, sort of biting the throats of one of the ponies. The ponies were deceased. And local police searched unsuccessfully for it. At first they didn't see it, but eventually a police officer sighted the dog walking along train tracks, and he shot at it. Frank Carter was the police officer. And apparently, either the bullets missed or had no ill effect on this dog. The dog sort of looked at him and just sauntered off as if nothing happened. The black dog is a supernatural, spectral, and sometimes demonic hellhound, as I said, originating in English folklore, but it's also been seen throughout Europe and the Americas. It is often described as unusually large, with sometimes glowing or red eyes, glowing red or yellow eyes, and is sometimes connected with the devil as an omen of death. It is sometimes associated actually with electrical storms, with crossroads, which is a trickster symbol of power excellence, and ancient pathways. It's generally regarded as sinister or malevolent, and some are regarded as directly harmful. The black dog folklore likely spread from the English diaspora after the colonizing of America. And there are other black dog reports in New England. They're somewhat slightly different. There's a famous black dog legend of Meriden, Connecticut, the Hanging Hills. But this is alleged to be a black dog that's small, not quite the same as the Abington one. There's also things down in Jersey, in the Pine Barrens, and in some sparsely popular areas of central Delaware. Another cryptid animal that was sometimes mentioned in, I should say quick, this is the report at the time in the papers about the Abington black dog. It says, memory of dog troubles Abington. It's from May of 1976. This is just an illustration. It's not the actual dog, but it's an illustration of what people thought they saw. So, besides giant black dogs and mammals, things like that, there are also some reports of giant cats in the southeastern Massachusetts area and sometimes in the Berkshires too. Around 1993, does anybody remember this? There was a whole big cat sightings around Easton and Mansfield. Anybody hear about that case? It was on the news. There were rumors around the 12th of March in 1993. There was a Boston Globe story of Easton woman, a woman from Easton, Mass, told police that she had seen a mountain lion in her backyard. And then a patron of Charlie's restaurant on Main Street said he saw it in the parking lot rummaging through a dumpster. A local butcher thought he saw the glimpse of the tail as it headed towards a railroad field. Again, the railroad tracks. There were reports of mauled ducks in Mansfield and missing chickens in Stoughton, and an influx of frightened deer over at Stonewall College. So the Easton police started getting as many as 100 lion-related calls a day, with sightings reported as far away as Sherborne. Now, finally, an Easton doctor provided authorities with actual hard evidence because of this town's mysterious new celebrity over there, because he had an 8-minute videotape of a mountain lion in all its glory. It was licking its paws, it was wandering around his yard, and then disappearing into the woods. And a sergeant over the Easton police said, "It's real, all right." He said he responded to the original report of the lion sighting about 2 weeks, and he said, "I was beginning to wonder because so many calls were coming in." Later, somebody on a website chimed in that he lived, in the early 90s, he lived on Elm Street, and his chicken coop was raided by said mountain lion. There was snow on the ground. They cut out the paw prints and they tried to put him in the freezer to save him. The media descended on the community. There was, as I said, there was news reports. It was on the local news. And interesting about the trickster stuff, I think this is really strange. So on May 1st, which is May Day, 1993, so just about 6 weeks after all this started up with the mountain lion sightings, a decapitated carcass of a 30 to 35 pound African wildcat, probably what's known as a serval, was found in Easton in the field, just off of Route 138 near the Easton Raynham line. But what's strange about that is a serval is a patterned animal. It does not look like a mountain lion in terms of its coat. And mountain lion is, tawny. It's kind of tan colored. It's usually not. Serval and a mountain lion are both felines, but they would not typically be confused with each other. They kind of think, the police kind of thought the serval was maybe was an animal that someone had acquired illegally and then killed it, and then took the head for taxidermy purposes. But big cat sightings have happened several times in Massachusetts. Around 1972, there was a so-called lion hunt in the Rehoboth area. And then down the Cape in the Truro area around 1981, there was something that was killing livestock and leaving deep gashes in their necks. They thought that was maybe a mystery big cat. Another thing cited in Massachusetts, especially in the Bridgewater Triangle area, are the accounts of giant birds. There was an account around 1988 where two boys were following tracks of giant three-toed footprints, and they finally came across a massive bird-like creature that they'd never seen before. Of course, the parents and different people told them they concluded it was probably a great blue heron, which is a very large bird and it is native to this area. But the boys swore that the creature they saw was much larger than any heron they'd ever seen, and it was more the size of a tall man with half-human features. Very strange to report. And this report would be almost laughable until you remember another sighting that was mentioned in the Bridgewater Triangle movie. This was a well-known case in 1971 where an off-duty officer named Sergeant Thomas Downey was driving home, I believe it was along Winter Street in the Mansfield area, and he came across sort of a Mothman-type, Birdman-type creature in the middle of the street allegedly. And this thing supposedly spread its wings and flew straight up. Not like how birds fly, but more like how like a supernatural falcon man or something flies. And of course he was teased mercilessly he was teased because his name's Downey, like Downy Feathers, they called him the Birdman, and his fellow officers gave him a hard time. And this is a fake picture from the internet, but just to give you the idea that people are fascinated by these Thunderbird reports. I'm sure that's pretty fake, but I couldn't find a real picture of a Thunderbird fire, so I thought I'd give you that. There are also reports of giant snakes. In 1939, there was a report of a humongous giant black snake that the CCC workers saw crossing the road. They described it, and people exaggerate about fish and turtles and snakes all the time, I know. But they described it as being as thick as a stovepipe, and it was never seen again. But there has been at least one report of a giant snake from Massachusetts. It was in the Raynham area in 1939. That's not it, but I just thought I'd give you something to look at. And giant snakes go way back in mythology, serpentine creatures that people have to fight. There was this is a topic for a whole other talk someday, but there was a whole wave of sightings on the North Shore around 1817 in the Gloucester area in the Haunt, where literally they think thousands of people, probably upper hundreds or maybe thousands of people spotted what was described as a sea serpent. My favorite story from that time period is there were a bunch of kind of well-to-do people on a boat and a recreational craft, and they were laughing at the local yokels saying, aren't these people in town so silly, they're seeing sea serpents? And right as it was being discussed, somebody said, oh look, there it is. And so these guys, when they were making fun of the local inhabitants, actually saw it themselves. These are some woodcuts, illustrations of the sea serpent. And there's a great book, if you're interested in the Gloucester sea serpent sightings, there's a book that's literally just about that. It's called The Great New England Sea Serpent. It's by a woman named J.P. O'Neill. I highly recommend it. It's an account of unknown creatures sighted by many respectable persons from 1683 to the present day. Here's a skeleton that was in the newspaper down on Cape Cod, probably oarfish or some kind of shark skeleton. But people still talk about sea serpent skeletons. In Lauren Coleman's reports, there's a report of a so-called frogman in the Silver Lake area. There are several Silver Lakes in Massachusetts. I think he's talking about the one that's over by Pembroke in the South Shore here. A wanted to give you
The frog man.
to a couple minutes left.
Hey, yeah. I mean, the day's gonna run behind though.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's a plan anyway.
So there was an article I came across. This was really interesting. It was fairly recent, and it's a report that has very credible witnesses. So remember I mentioned John Hanson Mitchell, the guy who wrote Ceremonial Time? Well, he has an online article where he talks about a pond in a lake in Littleton, Mass, called Long Lake. And on a clear night, two local scientists, not kids partying or anything like that, two local scientists spotted a long-necked aquatic animal rising above the surface of Long Lake. Dr. Timothy Ahern, who happens to hold a degree in aquatic biology of all things, and Dr. Lawrence Millman, an ethnographer and an authority on aquatic animals. So these two guys are into aquatic things. Spotted, they were boating along the shore of the lake when they saw a large serpent-like form rise out of the water. The creature stared at them and arched back and submerged. And this one guy said, I wouldn't have believed I saw it, except my buddy saw it too, so I knew I wasn't going crazy. It looked like a classic Loch Ness monster. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you is, so to go back to the Lake Nipanicket in the Bridgewater area, I got a report from my friend and fellow researcher Chris Pittman. He got an email in 2004 where a woman said that 19 years previously, she was living in East Bridgewater. She was at the parking lot at the Nip where you can put boats in, and she and her boyfriend, who were there, parking or whatever, saw a fire across the way. And he said, I know where that beach is. I know how to get there. So they went around the backside into the Raynham side of Lake Nipanicket. They went to go see if there was a party going on. Well, the strange thing is, when they got there, they saw people dancing around the fire and everything. And they were like, let's go join this party, check it out. Well, when they got there were no people, there was nothing on this beach, there was no fire, there was no running to the fire. And it was very strange, it was like a phantom fire, and they thought it was highly unusual, but the kicker is, to me, the really strange part is that when the woman gave her report, she said that not only was there nobody there, but there was no sign that anybody had been there. We sat there for a few minutes, got out, walked on the shore to see if they could see any flames further up the shore. Well, there was nothing. They saw nothing. Well, nothing except some sort of strange thing in the water watching us. The only way I can describe it is a snake-like neck sticking up out of the water with a huge single eye on it. And I used AI, when you do the prompts. So this is not an actual picture, but this is I used AI to get an idea of what this thing might look like. And so they left. They got right out of there. That was enough for them. They got in the car. They drove back to where they were, to the regional parking lot, and they swear they could see the exact spot. There was a fire again. So it was a very strange report. It was a phantom fire. They went over to check out the phantom fire. They saw some kind of cryptid creature allegedly coming out of the water. And I believe that is it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.